Okay, this video is going to take a closer look at the note offset option, specifically the scale note offset option, because there's a very tricky thing going on here that's easy to miss, but it can make a big difference in your phrases. So I'm just going to I've got a blank composition here, 4 bars. I'm going to go to my empty phrase and hit insert. And then I'm going to double click on that. So that takes me to the phrase editor. Okay, so let's create this phrase. And we'll start on C4. And we'll make that for 1/4 note. Okay. And then we can see it's got the &1, so we're in chord note relative mapping. So when we enter the notes, they are going to be chord note relative mapped. All right, so we start on C, then let's make a D. We'll make that, drag that to, make that an 8th note. So we see, let me right click here, bring our window. So what we want to pay attention to is the note number and the note offset under scale steps. We're not going to use any semitones, and we're only going to use, we're not going to use any semitones, just scale steps. So we got C, the next scale step in C major is D. So we've got number 1 plus 1. There we go, we got D. Now I'm going to put another 8th note on this E, and I want you to pay close attention to what we've got here. RapidComposer, when I clicked on the E, what it did was it put in the note number 2. Okay? And it did not put in number 1 plus 2. In other words, 2 scale steps above number 1. But we're going to leave that. Okay, we're going to leave it at number 2. So we know that number 2 is mapping to the 3rd of the chord, which in C major is the E. Okay, so we'll leave it at number 2, and then we'll put in an F. We'll make that an 8th note. Okay, so we've got our F there, and then we'll go to G. Okay, which is RapidComposer has put in a number 3 because the G is the 3rd note of a C major triad. Okay, or the 5th. Remember, RapidComposer's mapping scheme uses numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we're used to calling these we're used to calling these the root, the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th. I know I keep repeating this, but it's really important, and that's why I am stressing it. Okay, so let's just play this phrase. Okay, now I'm going to make this phrase, I'm going to make it 3 bars long. Which is 8 beats. Okay. All right. Now what I'm going to do pretty much the same thing as I did over here in the first measure on the second measure. So I'm going to start. I'm going to start. Put a 1/4 note in on the C4. Okay. And then I'm going to put an 8th note on the D. And again, you can see that this is mapped as a an offset, because you see the +1. Anytime you see these pluses or minuses after the note number, you know it's an offset. Okay, whether it's an octave or semitone, you're going to see this plus or minus plus a number, and that's going to tell you right away that this note is mapped to a previous note and it's offset. Okay, I shouldn't say previous note. Let me take that back. Let me just keep it simple. If it's got this extra number here, or plus or minus, it's offset. The note is offset, and it's going to be relative to some other note. That might be a little confusing. You'll get it in a minute. Now here's the key. I'm gonna put in the E. I'm gonna put in an eighth note E. Okay, and notice that this is not offset. There's no plus or minus note after the 2. This is just mapping to the 3rd. Now, that's what happened over here, but what I'm going to do is I don't want this mapped to the 3rd in this phrase. I want this mapped as a 1 plus 2 scale steps. Okay, now notice the note is exactly the same. It's an E4. So this note is number 4. I'm sorry, this note is mapped to the number 2, and this note is mapped to 1 plus 2 scale steps. But they're both E4. Okay? Then I'm going to go up to the F, put an eighth note. Okay? And notice the mapping on this. It's mapping to the number 2, which is the 3rd plus 1 scale step. That's not what I want. I want to do something different. I want to map this to number 1 and 2 scale steps. Okay? 2 scale steps. So that's my mapping. So notice here, they're both F, but this one says number 2 plus 1. This says number 1 plus 2 plus 2. Okay, so there's a different mapping, even though both notes are the same. And then I'm going to oops, what did I do there? Something got turned around. Let me start over from here. I'm going to put my F in here. And I'm going to correct the mapping, or remap it. Might be a better term. 1 plus 2 scale steps. Okay? So, the root is C. 1 scale step above C is D. 2 scale steps above C is E. Now, it should be 3 scale steps, correct? What am I doing wrong here? So this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. Okay. So this is mapped to 1 plus 3 scale steps. Sorry about that. Alright. And then in my the G, I'm going to map that as to note 1 and 4 scale steps. Okay? So you see the difference. All these 4 notes are all relative to note number 1, whereas in this part, this note here is mapped to the 3rd, not to number 1. Okay. All right. Now let me play this. Okay, they sound exactly the same, right? So why have I gone through all this trouble? What's the difference? Here's the difference. If I go to a scale like Phrygian, okay, which by the way is fairly common, we get a change. Okay, watch this. Let me play it. Okay, so the phrase is played differently when I go to Phrygian. It's not a big difference, but instead of the first part being C and then D, it plays C and C sharp. Okay, now in the Phrygian scale, the E, the F, and the G remain the same, but you can see that there's a difference when there's a difference in the way the phrase is going to be interpreted when we go to a scale like Phrygian, and there's other scales where this will happen as well. Okay, I'm not going to go into all these things. You know, we could go through different scales and see where which scales create this issue and which scales don't. Some scales it's not going to matter, right? So if we go to like natural minor, it doesn't matter. We can see that both phrases are the same, okay? But in certain scales, it will matter, okay? Dorian scale is the same. Let's see. What about the Lydian? The Lydian scale, which is, again, very often used, it changes, okay? So you have the F sharp, whereas over here with this mapping, you just have the natural F. So this can be important when you're creating these phrases and that are chord note relative mapped, and you're using them on you're using them with different chords and different scales. You can run into issues with the way they sound. They may not sound correctly, and one reason for that might be the way the notes are mapped. Now, I know we're getting into some pretty theoretical stuff here, and I don't pretend to have a very strong grasp of it, that's for sure. But I do want you to, I did want you to see this, and when you are creating your phrases, to kind of think through what you're trying to do, and when you put the notes in, to map them based on what kind of phrase you're trying to create. Okay. And I think it's also a good time to take a broad view about RapidComposer and these phrases. And here's the broad view. It's that these phrases are so malleable. Once you create them, you're going to keep them. This is going to be a library of material. And we can manipulate these phrases. We can retrograde them and do all kinds of things. So that's the power and the beauty of RapidComposer, in that, we create these phrases and we can use them again and again and again. Once they're created, all we've got to do is just drag them or insert them wherever we want. And my hope is that the RapidComposer user community, grows and grows, and we get some people that are 1,000 times more knowledgeable about music theory and 1,000 times more creative than I'll ever be. I'm just hoping that I can make some small contribution into kind of opening the door to this program and to its power, and people with the chops can can build on this. I was thinking in particular, I noticed on YouTube, you can find a lot of YouTube videos about jazz licks and gospel licks. And, essentially, what is a lick? I mean, a lick is a phrase, right? It's another name for a phrase. And so, uh, a lot of these YouTubes will show you how to play a certain. They're going to call it a lick, a guitar lick, a piano lick. Sometimes they'll call it a riff. They'll show you how to play one of these things, and these are like, uh, you know, these are like part of a jazz musician or gospel musician's vocabulary. And Beethoven had these things too. I saw a Rick Beato video once. He did something really interesting, showing like how one of the riffs that Beethoven liked to use. Um, you know, so in order to create these riffs, or I should say, in order to kind of translate them into Rapid Composer, and in order to be able to use them effectively, um, sometimes we've got to be aware of this chord note mapping scheme and how these offsets can work. Okay, so I hope that's helpful in giving you a kind of a reason behind um, this whole thing, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.